Startup businesses are the building blocks of new ideas that drive economic growth and job creation, along with much more. But some are missing out on this opportunity, particularly women. All-women founding teams raised no more than 3% of venture capital in the US over the past decade, according to PitchBook data. In the Middle East and North Africa, it's even less. Female-founded startups make up about 7% of startups in the region, according to Wamda, but only receive about 1% of the funding. This is actually an improvement from last year, when women received less than 0.5% of funding in 2023. In the region, we've seen initiatives looking to change these statistics, such as women angel investor groups helping women-led startups get needed funding. On International Women's Day, the National reported on how Saudi Arabia's new policies easing access for women into the workforce and founder space is seeing more Saudi women create companies. But with that said, women-only founders in Saudi Arabia made up only 3% of startups in 2024, but only received 0.4% of funding, according to Magnet. So as evident by the numbers, there's still a long way to go. This is Business Extra from the National News in Abu Dhabi, and I'm your host, Salim Essaid. In this episode, we hear from 3 UAE-based women founders who have anchored themselves as key players across a variety of industries. Yasmin Rose is the founder of Rise Birth Center, where she works to improve the culture surrounding birth in the Middle East. Yasmin Megerisi, founder and CEO of House of Meena, and the founder of fashion software company Silhouette. And also Thea Myhrvold, who is the CEO of Getbee, which is her third tech venture. We'll also hear a bit later from a leader in the startup funding space. So to start out, can you talk to me about how you describe the UAE startup scene, and particularly for women, to understand what inspired you to enter this field where there maybe aren't as many women as men?
So from a startup perspective, I think it's changed quite a lot over the past 10 years. But for me personally, I'm born and raised in Saudi, and I came back to the region with a goal of starting something positive for, but also from the Middle East. And Dubai was a great platform to do that and sort of to expand in the region, but also globally. What's very interesting about Dubai, or the UAE specifically, is the demographics that you have here. It's such an international place to launch and test something and iterate relatively quickly, especially from a tech perspective. And it's a great launchpad into other cities and areas too. However, I think the ecosystem has had some growing pains, but it is growing and it is learning, and it is also very ambitious. So it's exciting to be a part of that change and to be a part of that growth. But as founders and as investors, it's also up to us to be a part of shaping the change that we want to see.
Do you find that the startup scene currently is kind of geared towards men, from the meeting times to investor meetings themselves? What are you finding in terms of the landscape at the moment with your experience when it comes to operating as a woman founder?
It's hard to say when you're not a man to know what the difference is, but I think there are a lot of conversations in Majlis, for example. So late night men getting together, etc. And we're missing that, or kind of the boys club idea. So obviously we're not invited, so maybe that's part of the funding problem. But yeah, there is a community that's growing, but I would say still this region, it's a small ecosystem. It's definitely growing.
Exactly, and I think you bring up the good point that it's not just about the gender gap. There are other factors as well about the maturity of the sector itself. But speaking of the numbers, we have also seen different data compared globally that female-founded startups accounted for less than 7% of funded startups, raising $27.6 million, or 1.2% of total funding. However, that was an improvement from 2023, when they represented just 0.47%, according to Wamda. So that is a staggering number. To dip, to rise, is this because of maybe the lack of maturity of the market? It's still growing, so it's fluctuating high and low, or has there been a decline, do you think, in funding? Because funding is the key thing to be able to build startups. Community is important, support is important, but can you describe your experience with funding and what you've faced so far?
Yeah, so for context, I'm a third-time founder, sold my previous venture, and we are VC-backed also from the US. So I have different contexts. So I think when you zoom out, if you look at the macro, it's around 2% of female founders get funded globally. So we're not at a good place globally at a macro level either. And this is just then reflecting in the regional ecosystem because of the other factors we talked about. So there's a ratio here that makes sense from that perspective. And I definitely think that's correlated. But I do see extra challenges in this whole ecosystem around female and minority founders getting funded from an unconscious bias perspective. And there's a fantastic TED Talk by Dr. Karen who analyzes 10 years of TechCrunch sort of public pitch competitions, where she analyzes how female and male founders present themselves and the language that we use. She actually studies language. And so what's really interesting is that founders present and pitch in very similar ways, and we promote ourselves in very similar ways. But the questions that both male and female VCs ask are very different. And this is the lens that we're shining on investments. So if you ask a founder, for example, tell me how you're not going to go bankrupt, that's a very different question than tell me about how big this can be. You're already starting on the back foot.
On the defensive from the beginning. Yeah.
It's an incredible perspective to take because you're already default looking at this from a negative perspective. And that puts a person in a negative headspace too, right? Because you are being defensive. The good news here, though, is through her studies and research, is if you flip the question around and you get asked a negatively loaded question and you say, this is how we're going to protect ourselves, but also this is how we're going to grow, female founders then went on to raise twice as much money. So there is a positive here. And as I was telling the others earlier, when I first saw that TED Talk, I actually cried because I finally understood that I wasn't going crazy. I was like, what am I not getting? What am I not seeing? But once I really understood what was going on in terms of this unconscious bias programming, I managed to turn it around and flip it. And that was just such a relief to truly understand what was going on. So it is a systemic issue across the board and globally, but I think we need to do more as female founders, as investors, to also raise awareness, be part of representation because representation matters. And that's where we're going to also overcome these sort of challenges like unconscious bias because it's programmed because we're not hearing female voices. We're not celebrating female voices. We're also not celebrating female successes in terms of financial returns. A lot of this is seen as social impact or charity, and it's not. The financial returns make sense.
Definitely. I think you spelled that out very well. And also, I like the idea of not just identifying a problem, but you found a solution. And through that method of flipping the script, while you were put in the defensive, but then saying, no, but this is actually where we can get growth and directing the conversation where you wanted to. So answering the question, how do you change these mindsets? It's literally redirecting thought processes with maybe unconscious questions that they're asking. They might not, people in investor meetings might not know, specifically addressing women and men differently in that case, but then you're able to revert it back so it's not a loss in staying in the defensive. So in terms of what skills actionables can you walk away with, that's very on point. And I'll extend to the regional focus. So I think that applies globally, correct, what you described, Thea? So in the region, do you find, like you mentioned, Yasmin Rose, about the Majlis situation in terms of some meetings happen late at night, it's only men in men's settings. Do you find there are other regional specific obstacles when it comes to maybe the investor meetings or getting opportunities or getting funding specifically?
I think it's just part of our culture that before you invest in someone or before you do business with someone, you want to get to know them, right? So a lot of people, with men, it just comes easier because they're in these surroundings and they're in these places. So they are more open to meeting the right people at the right time. Although I do think that there's a lot of things in play when it comes to meeting people at the right time. But in general, when you're out in these spaces, you will mix with people who will eventually lead you to the right people. So I think that's a big opportunity that we sometimes don't get. And then even if you are sitting in the rooms with them, the conversation is different. I don't think we get taken as seriously in certain situations, certain subjects, especially when it comes to tech or business or anything that we don't know anything about. Maybe with birth, they're like, right, it's a woman leading it. So I think, as a birthing center, we don't know what to do, but she's got it in control because she's a woman, so she knows kind of that specific subject. So that could be, I think it's just, I think we need to expand our young females more into different topics and different fields. And I think that will help in terms of us mentoring younger women, perhaps, and just educating people in a different way. I think there's a lot of bias in this region because you also have people from neighboring countries, right? So they also have a bias towards women and dealing with women, and women are not always up in central places or on someone's boss, for example. So people don't take that well. And I've had experiences where I just get ignored or people don't listen because they just don't like the fact that I'm telling them what to do. As nicely as you say it, sometimes you just don't. And then you have to be harsh and then they'll listen. And then it's like, well, I should have done that from the beginning, or why didn't you just listen from the beginning? Because they just don't. I don't know. It's just.
It's like a more masculine trait of being assertive and to the point, and that's
but
what
even,
captures
there's
attention.
assertive and then there's rude, right? But you don't want to be either. So it's just like, just freaking do it. But it doesn't get done because they don't take you seriously, or they think they know better. I get that a lot. Oh no, that's not how we should do it. We should do it like this. But no.
Oh, the classic men's.
Yeah. It's very strange. I've always led by my gut. And I think there's certain instincts that I like to follow, certain ways that I do business. And I'm not going to let anyone change that, especially at my age. So I think they do try. No, we can do this better. Or maybe you should do it. But other people don't do that. But no, give me a reference. But no, but I'm not reference. I don't care what other people are doing. This is what I. So there's definitely been a lot of issues in that sense. And then when it comes to funding and investment, it's also a whole other story. So.
Yeah, I want to touch on some points that you mentioned. So one was the subject matter or industry focus. So for example, if it's a very traditionally female industry or something such as beauty or childcare or something, is that something, given that investors usually find familiarity in the companies they're working for, that's most of the people, chair people in companies are majority men, or the investors themselves are mostly men, that they just can't relate to the content? Is that, like, which one do you think is the, I would say, more significant influence in terms of maybe not knowing how to engage? Is it the topic, or is it maybe women specific, the method, more male way of doing business versus female way of being more gentle and understanding or something traditionally?
It could be a bit of both, honestly. For me, I try to follow the retailers because that's my target market. So why not get investment from people who understand, who are in the field? So that would make sense to me. Whether they're the female retail women that I've chased have been very disappointing. And it's the men that have come up just willing to try out the product, whatever it is, just to sample it. We're not asking for anything at this stage, but just kind of their willingness to try new things, to try new tech, to get involved. That's something that you see more in men for sure, to take more risk, I guess, which I found in my personal journey.
Could part of it as well be that investments seem to be shifting as well now towards tech and science and engineering and stuff like that, while a number, like right now I would say, initially I thought it was 1 out of 3, but now you've shifted to the AI space. So maybe that predominantly a lot of women companies are more in this traditional female sectors or something versus in tech. I'm not sure. Do you find that
I want to dispel that myth. There are amazing women who work in tech, and someone we should be really proud of from the region is May Habib. She started a company called Ryder, and they are now in the billions in terms of valuation. She started here in the UAE. She's now scaled between London and San Francisco. It's a very tech-heavy company in the AI space. So no, absolutely. Of course, we have female-led businesses that are supporting female-led industries, but we also have some incredible female engineers and tech talent that are doing amazing things in very tech-heavy topics. And just going back to your previous question, investors look at the team. So why are you the right person to solve this problem? Do you have a deep understanding of this problem? Be it in B2B, be it in SaaS, be it in enterprise, be it medical, whatever it is that you're doing. So I think just to kind of find a solution to that question, you need to prove why you are the right person or the right team to execute on something, regardless of your gender. But that is your job to also present to investors on why you are the subject matter expert and why you will get this done.
Yeah, to dispel the perception and show the expertise, and that's what they should be focusing on.
Yeah.
And Yasmin, Rose, I'll ask you this in terms of, since you have a connection to funding, can you describe what that is and then see how you see the current landscape with women investing in women?
Yes, so I'm part of the movement 2022 Female Angels, and the whole point of it was to get more women out there investing because we have money, we've made money. Like when I was in corporate, I would have happily been an angel investor, but how do I get involved? I had no idea about it.
It goes to also the thing of like wearing multiple hats, right? Because you had to get the money, but then also work in the process of being able to bring in the money at the same time.
As a founder, yeah. But at this point, like just to get involved with 2022 Female Angels, it was really like, yes, support this. Of course, women should have access to angel investing because maybe all of it is happening in Majlis conversations. We don't talk about investment and finance in general that much. So we made a lot of strides to educate women about, or anybody really, but a lot of our audience is women, about how to be an angel investor, what to look for, what that means. Even now as a founder, I'm taking a female angel with me, and this is their first time investing. Well, I don't know what this means. I don't know what this means. Chat GPT says this about this. And so
Interesting. So you're helping train an investor in how to invest in
in me. But it's great. Like, I'm glad she's willing to take that process. And that was the aim of the movement as well, to get more women investing as angels, because part of it, and what was kind of brought up earlier, is the topic is sometimes different. So I'm doing a business that I found to be a real problem, and I saw it as a woman. And so it's very specific. So it's much easier to talk to a woman who's had a baby and she immediately understands the need for having midwifery-led care. Whereas a man, I have to understand first, do you have kids? Were you in the room when your wife gave birth? Like, how much were you involved in the education process? So I know where to start with you to explain what the problem is and why the solution makes sense and why it's a good investment. So I think sometimes female founders, if they're so specified as well in a problem that's an issue for women, it might be harder to explain it and have somebody understand it. And like, as an investor, maybe you want to invest in something you understand. Like, I would be uncomfortable with doing NFT type of things because I don't know enough about it. So I wouldn't want to invest in that. And so I understand from that perspective as well that sometimes men just don't understand the issue, so that he can't really say, I see where this is going to be a big hit or not. I think there's more hesitation perhaps, which is then also harder for females to find funding if they have a specific problem. But then I think Thea did a good job of explaining why there's just unconscious bias, whether or not it's a female-specific company.
And would you say, since you mentioned that there are the male majlises that take place, you've created women's spaces to be able to have those same conversations. And what do you see as the next steps to be able to basically change the numbers in terms of increasing funding, assuming that is the main need, correct? In
For
comparison?
women, I think the most effective thing would be put in like a bit more of government mandates and get some support that way, because then there's a real push. Okay, well, we see that females make more. We see that they're 48% more profitable from female-founded companies versus male. We see that because of the risk aversion and looking through everything, like, women companies just do better. Like, they just perform better. So there's a good reason to support it from a government level. So I think that would be really effective and helpful. I don't know if it's going to happen. I certainly hope so, because we do see the UAE very supportive of women in general. And so I think that's a big part of women empowerment is funding. We see this huge gap, even worse here in the region than the world, which all of the numbers are bad, but it's definitely worse here. So that's an opportunity. We'll see.
Yeah, and where do you see funding mostly coming from? Because Thea, you mentioned that you're now getting funding from outside in the US, was it correct?
Yeah.
So even from the direction, I guess it's coming, whether from government, whether from private entities, whether from individuals, or even people funding their own companies if they're able to. Where do you see at the moment, and particularly for women in the region, is funding actually coming from, or were they able to get it mostly from?
I was advised to leave the region to go get funding outside.
Same.
I was born and raised in the UK, and they basically said, just go back to the UK and get your funding, and you will get it from there. So, but for me, it's a real source of pride as an Arab to get funding from here, but also to have my company be established here and to grow from here and then to expand globally from here. It's a source of pride for me as an Arab. I can't do it in my own country, unfortunately, because of the circumstance. So this is now...
Oh, sorry, can you say where you're from?
I'm from Libya. So, and I've been out of Libya for so long now that so for me, I've been here for many years, and it's my home. And for me, it's my link to the Arab world. And I want my company to come out of here. I want it to be known as a brand that's grown from the UAE.
And that was our mission, and that's what we did.
Yeah.
So we were born here, and my personal thesis has always been, how can we create a global success story for, but also from the Middle East? And I think at the end of the day, it's about business, and you need growth and scale. And we're now very proudly partnered with Microsoft in the US, and we're scaling in the US. So from a B2B software market, there's no bigger market than the US, but very proud to say that we're born and we started here, and we scaled a concept for and from the region and innovation from here to a global stage. And that reverse is quite rare. We often see the copy-paste, right? Models come here. So that's something that I'm also personally very proud of.
Yeah.
So thank you for having this conversation. And do you have any final thoughts? Just want to go around and see if you have any final thoughts on the topic.
Yeah, just to add to that, I think it's not us versus them. It really isn't. When it comes to investors and founders, it's really, we need to be united and we need to move together to the same goal, which is to grow the ecosystem, just have more innovation in the country and just support our founders and even our young founders. You've got kids who are super young at this age and being involved in coding and which is great. And I think we need to encourage that and support that. And as investors, they need to take more risk and just help founders. And I think we need to unite. That's the big thing.
And as Thea said, be the example, right? When they have someone hasn't seen what a female founder who is successful actually looks like in tech and advancing in these industries, like seeing is believing. So that's probably helping to pave the way.
Representation matters for that reason.
Yeah. 100%.
Yeah.
And Thea, final thoughts? Yeah.
I was going to say, and hopefully we're not having these conversations in a few years around like the disparity around how female founders need more help or minority founders need more help, because we should be evolving as a community and collaborate in these things as well. I think for anyone listening, be conscious of like how you vote with your wallet. Think about how you can support other female-led businesses or minority-led businesses. Research and understand if your friends are founders, like their comments and repost their things and support each other. I think there's so many ways that we can elevate, support, collaborate. If you're not able to invest in something, that's fair, but you can vote with your wallet. So be conscious of how you're supporting people in your life or in your community in the many different ways that you can.
Amazing. I like that. Rose?
I'll just add on to her point there. I think there's a misconception sometimes that investments have to be huge, like the ticket must be $50,000 or whatever. And there's enough founders out there that are looking for, especially in tech, they're looking for just the next bit to get them the next development done. So you can get involved with a smaller ticket. You can put in $1,000 to $5,000. It's just finding them. So, look at the different ways to get involved and be more active as an angel. I think we just need more angels. I also would like to say, I think the more females that succeed and exit or have success, they're going to be the ones putting back in, because all of these investor meetings I go to and I'm just like, I would never do that. I would never do that. Like, I'm learning so much about how I will and will not behave with founders. Yeah. Like, it's set in my mind how I will be as an investor already. And so I'm so looking forward to that day where I can be just the sigh and the relief for some other founder who's struggling as hard. It's not necessary. It's not necessary. So I'm excited for the day I can be on the other side of the table and help these founders.
I like that, channeling the frustration into like being the person in the future to make those decisions. So.
Yeah, well, you can't hold on to the frustration. Always you'd go crazy. It's a frustrating time to raise money as a female.
Make a point to moving forward, invest in female founders, I think.
Be the change.
Solely in female founders, just for a while, just to balance things up. And then we can... whatever, but I think...
We'll make good investments if the company makes sense. But sure, be aware of the unconscious bias that Thea mentioned. And be willing to,
The talent's out there, just identifying them, giving the opportunities to pursue.
Yeah. I was going to say, on the topic of unconscious bias, is even when you're hiring, right? Like, what are the questions you're asking candidates? So be aware of your unconscious bias regardless.
Very true. We'll be right back.
Ever wondered what it feels like to be a gladiator, facing a roaring crowd and potential death in the Colosseum? Find out on the Ancients podcast from History Hit. Twice a week, join me, Tristan Hughes, as I hear exciting new research about people living thousands of years ago, from the Babylonians to the Celts to the Romans, and visit the ancient sites which reveal who and just how amazing our distant ancestors were. That's the Ancients from History Hit.
Welcome back. We just heard from 3 women founders from across industries who shared with us some hopes and grievances about the startup environment for women in the region, and really all over the world. Now, let's get into the numbers behind those grievances.
I've been in the funding business for quite some time in the financial sphere, because as you know, when I started working on sustainable development, what I was faced with is that if you don't have the money, there is nothing you could develop, actually.
That's Hynd Bouhia, who's a trained engineer who earned her PhD from Harvard. She also had her own company focused on structuring funds and investing in startups. Through her own work in the field, she's seen firsthand the successes and shortcomings of these initiatives.
Well, we are seeing more women coming into entrepreneurship. It's just that they don't represent, the gender gap has been closing and it's getting there, but it seems slower than the pace and the speed at which other VC and venture capitalists and funds are putting money into bigger companies owned by men. So that's why the number might not even mirror exactly the reality.
There are initiatives out there that work exclusively on minimizing that gap. But like in the case of North Africa, the numbers tend to misrepresent what's actually happening.
One of the big ones, I was reading about it this morning, that closed $1 billion. It's the African Development Bank that launched it. It's Affirmative Finance Action for Women in Africa, which is an initiative that reached $1 billion milestone in investment for women entrepreneurs across Africa by January 2025. That's a huge number, isn't it? But we don't see it because North Africa, specific countries, they don't benefit from it. So you can't see it. There are more into Africa, and it's spread, so you don't, and the spread and the impact is not that big for one person that it's not even taken into consideration. But because there is so much more to be absorbed in terms of the gap and in terms of the need to bring a lot of countries and a lot of women and families into just the basics.
These numbers are shifting, though. The Middle East and North Africa's startup scene is thriving, having grown at a compound annual rate of 39% between 2018 and 2023. However, startups with at least one female founder have a 24% share of the funded startups during the same period, according to Magnet data.
If you look at VC, which is the venture capital funding in the continent, only 7% goes to women. Okay, 7%. That's 2023 numbers. And in the 7%, a very small part goes to North Africa because we don't have a lot of them in North Africa. So a Harvard Business School study went into that to understand why there is a gender bias in investment. And it turns out that investors, when they come to ask women entrepreneurs, they focus on a loss questions. For men, they ask them gain-focused question. How will you grow? How will you? So I thought it's all related to the mental. This is a Harvard Business School. This is not me saying it. This is the study. So the bias reduces funding success rates for women-led firms. And this is what I say. There is nothing to do with government not helping, people not being encouraged. Nothing. It has to do with the mentality of the connection, how you link them. And women, they represent only 12% of senior general partners in VC companies, for example, in Africa. That's very few, right? So will women encourage women? That's another question. But the bias comes from the mentality. And that's where the shift needs to happen. See? And the shift needs to happen when the attitude for women changes, all the rest will change.
That's all for this episode of Business Extra. This episode was produced by Yasmin Al-Taji and audio engineered by Arthur Edison, and Duat Farid is our editor. And I'm your host, Salim Essaid.